Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History podcast. And today I want to talk about the events of the German Revolution and the kind of period which you could describe as a counter-revolution from late 1918 or early 1919 onwards. By late 1918, it looked as if liberal democracy had established itself in Germany. Germany had never been quite as autocratic as Tsarist Russia, nor quite as democratic as, say, France or Great Britain. It had been this curiously authoritarian hybrid of a directly elected Reichstag, but also a chancellor appointed by an authoritarian Kaiser and a large presence, a powerful militarism which kind of cemented society together. The German Revolution, which ended Germany's First World War, seemed to have dramatically changed all that. The Weimar Constitution was established, but there were on the fringes of German politics not only radical leftists, but extreme ultranationalists who were synonymous with the Freikorps and other secret societies that were still really fighting the war long after the armistice of November 1918. So today I'm looking again at The Vanquished by Robert Gerwarth, and it's an excellent book, particularly looking at the nuances and the details of this revolutionary period in Germany. And the first thing he looks at is the complexities of politics on the left and the emergence of the German Communist Party. What you see in Germany in the winter of 1918 to 19 is a schism within the revolutionary movement between moderate and radical revolutionaries. So really the moderate and the radical left. The moderates being are seen as the Social Democrats, and the radicals emerging into the communist movement. So the Social Democratic Party, that had been the largest party in Germany, had divided during the war between the majority Social Democrats that carried on with the war and the independent Social Democrats that wanted an immediate halt to the conflict. The majority Social Democrats believed that a democratically elected National Assembly, a democratically elected Reichstag, would be the only body that could decide on the future constitution for Germany. However, the more radical left-wing independent Social Democrat Party, the USPD, who were known as the Spartacist League, and believed that the National Assembly, an elected National Assembly, would be an institution of bourgeois power. It would be how the middle classes would perpetuate their rule in Germany. Far better, they said, to seize the revolutionary moment and to rule Germany now through a system of workers' councils, or Soviets as they would be known in Russia. The USPD, the majority Social Democrats, and the other parties of the Weimar government, the moderate centre parties, saw this immediately as part of a kind of a Soviet ploy to expand influence into Germany. And despite the fact that many members of the USPD were actually staunch critics of Lenin and weren't necessarily supporters of the Bolshevik Party in Russia at all. On the left, there were two significant figures, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Karl Liebknecht came from left royalty, really. He was a radical figure who had been part of the Liebknecht family, obviously, son of Wilhelm Liebknecht, who had been one of the closer collaborators with Marx and who had established the SPD alongside August Bebel. Karl Liebknecht was more radical than his father, who he believed that social democracy was simply a device for propping up the capitalist system, essentially making things slightly nicer for the workers and making a revolution less likely. He studied law at the universities of Leipzig and Berlin and opened a law practice in 1899 which defended socialists in the German courts and Bismarck's anti-socialist laws. In 1907, Liebknecht got himself into significant trouble by his various anti-militarist writings, and he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. This actually served to enhance his reputation on the left, and he was elected to the Reichstag as a Social Democrat in 1912. He was the only member of the Reichstag to vote against war credits in 1914. The war credits vote is a significant moment in the history of the European left, as that was the moment where the left, the largest left party in Europe, decided to embrace what the rest of socialist Europe viewed as a capitalist war. The reason why the Social Democrats chose to do this was their view that the nation must unite against the threat from Russia, and that really there would be very little chance of anything progressive happening in Germany ever again, with Russian boots on the Unter den Linden. From 1914 onwards, a small grouping within the SPD emerged, known as the Group of the International, and in 1916 it renamed itself the Spartacus League, or the Spartacists as they were also known, the Spartacus being the leader of slave rebellion against ancient Rome, as you fans of Kirk Douglas probably know. They wrote various correspondences and pamphlets called the Spartacus Brief or Spartacus Letters, and Liebknecht openly advocated socialist revolution, the overthrow of the capitalist system and the immediate end to the war. This, of course, is all banned, and Liebknecht was not immune from prosecution despite being a parliamentarian, and he was arrested and sent as a soldier to the Eastern Front, hopefully to be killed by a stray bullet, so that his enemies wished. He was released in 1915 as a result of ill health, and was arrested again on May Day 1916 for leading an anti-war demonstration in the Potsdamer Platz. He was sentenced following that to 4 years imprisonment for high treason, and it was in October 1918, as the Kaiser's rule crumbled, that all political prisoners were amnestied, and the democratization of the German Empire resulted in him being able to walk out of prison, and straight into another anti-war demonstration, which resulted in him being welcomed into the Russian embassy, where Bolshevik ambassadors, the new Bolshevik ambassadors, welcomed him with a polite reception. Now, if you were a Social Democrat in late 1918 and you had spent the last year from late 1917 looking eastwards, you would have seen Social Democrats in Russia, the Mensheviks and other moderates on the left, being arrested and in some cases executed by Lenin's Cheka. Now, seeing Karl Liebknecht walk into the Russian embassy, having advocated socialist revolution, would start to make you think very carefully about your own fate as a centre-left moderate. Because again, those on the radical left saw the centre-left as being far more dangerous than any other force in politics, because they're the people that could hold up the revolution. They're the people that could convince the workers that things are basically okay and the status quo, whilst made slightly nicer, could be acceptable. And it was this that would perhaps be the thing that sealed Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg's fate in the end. So talking about Rosa Luxemburg, She was a Polish-born activist, Marxist and intellectual and writer. And the two of them had been editors of a communist newspaper, Die Rote Fahne, or the Red Flag. She'd been born in Zamość in Russia and had been the youngest daughter of a Jewish wood merchant who made sure that all his children had a humanist education. And the result of this was that, like many of her generation, she became involved in revolutionary activities. There seems to be an interesting correlation between her story and Leon Trotsky's, who was also the son of a kind of a Jewish farmer of the middling sort, who sent his son away to get a good, and in this case again a sort of humanist kind of education, and the tendency as outsiders in a chauvinistic Russian society for which there are few opportunities for Jews to embrace revolutionary activities. It seems to have been prevalent in both cases. The obvious destination for her by 1889 was Zurich, where most of the European revolutionary left tended to congregate, as it was a kind of a safe haven. Here, with her lover Leo Jogiches, who was from Vilnius, they founded the Social Democratic Party of Poland and Lithuania, of whom one of the alumni was the future secret police luminary and chief torturer Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was the mastermind behind Lenin's initial Red Terrors. Rosa Luxemburg gained German citizenship eventually by marriage and moved to Berlin and joined the SPD. And became key in the debates between the revolutionary and the reformist branches of the party. She was jailed 3 times, in 1904 and 1906, and then during the war, and never at any point gave up kind of political activism, even when she was in jail. So she was released in November 1918, along with the general amnesty. And on returning to Berlin, she met with Karl Liebknecht, and the radical left kind of cements around them until January 1919. They both articulate the same kind of language as Lenin and the Bolsheviks, demanding all power to the councils, and a second revolution. Obviously, Russia had had 2 revolutions in 1917, a revolution that brought the provisional government to power, and then a revolution that brought the Bolsheviks to power. And she argued that the new Weimar government under Philipp Scheidmann and Friedrich Ebert was just simply a continuation of Imperial Germany, after having gone through something of a rebranding exercise. She said, Scheidmann and Ebert are the appointed leaders of the German Revolution in its current stage, but the revolution is not standing still. Its law of life is rapid advancement. In saying things like this, both Luxemburg and Liebknecht, essentially, in the eyes of the Weimar government, had declared war on the Weimar government. But things were going to progress in a radical and violent direction in December. By Christmas 1918, the left-wing People's Navy Division, who were former sailors in Berlin who had sided with the more radical aspects of the revolution, and the Social Democrats controlled military forces of the city, who were led by the majority Social Democrat Otto Wels, clashed. The Wels believed that the Navy Division, who were closely connected to Luxemburg and Liebknecht, were a dangerous threat. These were armed men in Berlin who were advocating a Bolshevik-style overthrow of the government. Wels believed that the division, the Navy division, should be reduced in size, and their weapons should be taken from them, and that their wages should be withheld as leverage. On the 23rd of December, mutinous sailors seized Wels and took him prisoner. Friedrich Ebert saw this as an attack on the state and reacted quickly. In a way, Ebert had had a very good education looking at the Russian Revolution, where there was periodically in situations like this inaction and indecision. In Germany, the moderate left were determined not to be taken by surprise in this way. Ebert didn't speak to his to the USPD, who he was in coalition with. Instead, he goes straight to the army. Now, the army are the bastions of reaction in Germany. They the only reason why they spend any time supporting the moderate left SPD-led Weimar government is because they fear and hate the alternative so much more. The possibility that the USPD or even communists could get into power is really, really very alarming indeed. But they're willing to listen to Ebert if Ebert wants to do something that will benefit their cause in some way. Friedrich Ebert, the Chancellor, makes the mistake perhaps of assuming that the army are actually on his side. The army is happy to oblige, and there was fighting for the city centre of Berlin around the Imperial Hohenzollern Imperial Castle, and unfortunately for the government, the naval division are able to prevail. These are elite fighters who managed to defeat German army troops. This is referred to as the Battle of Christmas Eve, and it showed how weak the Ebert government was in the face of radical protest and radical forces. There were two consequences of this. The first being that the USPD, the Independent Social Democrats, and the majority Social Democrats, power company, never again to be reconciled. On the 29th of December, 3 USPD representatives left the Council of People's Deputies, strongly protesting about Ebert's decision to send troops against the sailors. The second problem was that the Prime Minister of Prussia, Paul Hirsch, who was again a majority Social Democrat, decided that he was going to get rid of the Berlin Chief of Police, which was within his gift to do, Emil Eichhorn. Eichhorn was a kind of a popular figure on the left, and he had come to the assistance of the People's Navy Division, and he had sent out the Sicherheitswehr, or the Berlin Security Guard, the kind of the paramilitaries of Berlin, to help the Navy Division against the army. The USPD and other left-wing groups, including the emerging Communist Party, reacted to what they thought was deliberate provocation, and they called a mass demonstration against the Ebert government for the restoration of Eichhorn into his job. Now, this mass demonstration boils out of control very quickly, and on the 5th of January 1919, the situation escalates, and you have USPD and Spartacist demonstrators seizing the Social Democratic newspaper Vorwärts, and they also take control of publishing houses across Berlin's newspaper district. On the evening of the 5th of January, These actions were followed by the formation of a revolutionary committee. This meant that Liebknecht was able to further escalate the situation against the government by again demanding its overthrow. So this is an explicitly insurrectionary moment. It kind of emerged in a piecemeal way, as revolutions often do, but the decision to remove Eichhorn from his job had provoked the left, had provoked the Spartacists into a kind of disorganized uprising, and Liebknecht draws order from the chaos and starts to give the movement shape and purpose. So, the Spartacists were a very small organisation. They were tiny in number, really, and in influence and power. But Ebert was deeply worried about them. He took the threat very seriously. His view was that the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia offered a kind of a textbook version of what could happen in Germany. And this meant that there was the possibility in Ebert's mind of a government being overthrown by a tiny, tiny minority. In Ebert's way of thinking, the communist uprising in Berlin was not dissimilar to the October Revolution in St. Petersburg, in Petrograd. And there was one figure on Ebert's side who was more than happy to get his hands dirty. This was the MSPD's defense minister, a military expert, Gustav Nosk. And Nosk was happy to make deals with the army, and he famously said, "Somebody has to be the bloodhound, and I do not shrink from this responsibility." He gained control of government troops around Berlin to restore law and order, and he did this in the most violent and bloody means possible. So he doesn't rely just on normal troops, but instead on the Freikorps, who we've been talking about recently. And these are some of these guys who, if you'd heard me talking about the Baltic states recently, some of these were the Freikorps who had returned from the Baltic states after fighting communists there. And he called upon them as volunteers to destroy the Spartacists in the capital. And his choice of the Freikorps is quite deliberate. He knows he's choosing the men who loathe and hate the communists more than anything else. The result is fairly swift, and the Freikorps men who have been indoctrinated by the army to see the communists as the cause of all of Germany's problems and the cause of Germany's downfall and the reason why Germany lost the war, engaged